Well, good morning if you are somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean watching us as people do on Fred Plotkin on Fridays. Good afternoon if you're in Austin, Texas or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Good evening if you are in Slovakia, where some of our favorite singers come from. Good evening and greetings to people all around the world, and welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all over the world. My guest today is someone I know just slightly, who I respect a lot, and I'm looking forward to getting to know her better and speaking with her. She's Annie Burridge. She is the General Director and Chief Executive Officer of what I still lazily call Austin Lyric Opera. It is Austin Opera in Austin, Texas, in the United States, but Austin is known to people all over the world. And it's known as, I think the title is the capital, world capital of live music, and that includes opera.
That's right. Yes.
So, Annie Burridge, welcome.
Thank you, Fred. It's exciting to be here.
Let's start. By the way, it's July 18th. It's the summer. Let's start by having our listeners all around the world get to know you. I know you're from Philadelphia, but that's all I know.
I am. I am from Philadelphia, but I've been here in Austin, Texas, for almost 9 years now. I'm coming to you from my home, because the Austin Opera headquarters is currently a construction site. We've got a new building and we're building a small theater there. And so we've all been kicked out to be remote for a few months, while that construction's underway. So you're inside my house here in Austin, Texas. But yes, I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up, daughter of a choral director, choral teacher, so grew up very attached to classical music. I played piano first, then picked up clarinet, but my very serious instrument was a string bass. I played that very
Mm.
seriously all the way through about halfway through college. But I loved really to act and perform. I loved musical theater. I loved to sing, and the only catch was that I had a really high soprano voice that developed. I couldn't belt to save my life. So maybe a classic piece of music theater. In high school we did Wonderful Town. So like, thank goodness, I was able to do a great, Bernstein piece with some great soprano music in it. But it was my dad who said, like,
Did you play Eileen or the other one whose name I forget?
yeah,
You were
I,
Eileen,
yes.
of course. Okay.
And it was my dad who said, there's this other art form where you can sing really high but still kind of act, and it's classical music. And it's like, right, opera. And I started listening to opera, and I just decided that I was going to have a life in opera before I even saw an opera. Just listening to opera. One of my very first CDs, was the Art of Coloratura, and it was every coloratura aria that was out there.
Was that
And
Joan
then
Sutherland?
the one I had was a compilation of many different singers,
Of many, okay.
definitely
She did
included
she did
on
the art of the
there.
prima donna, you're right.
Yes.
Yeah, got
And
it.
so I went to Penn State, and upon entering there, I just decided that I wanted to be an opera singer, and then one day I wanted to run an opera company. And now it's too late to turn back, right? That's what
But
transpired.
that's quite a transition. I can understand wanting to be an opera singer.
Hmm.
I can maybe understand wanting to run an opera company, but it's usually when you can't sing or other factors get involved. I know singers, wonderful singers, who are saying that in their next career, they will run an opera company or work as an administrator, but that they want to have their singing career first.
Hmm.
It sounds
So
like you wanted to do both leaps right away.
right, but keep in mind, I had no idea what either of those really entailed. So I was
Okay.
18 years old. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I majored in music and I minored in business at Penn State.
Mhm.
And, often people would comment, oh, it was so smart that you had a fallback. But it was never a fallback for me. It was really an equivalent interest in making opera happen and making it being playing a role and having it performed and kind of a vibrant part of the world and of the arts community. And I don't really remember much from those business courses in my undergraduate training, except that I could do just as well in those courses as anything else. So I built the confidence that I could probably do that other job. And being in Penn State, I had a wonderful voice teacher, and that's really what matters as an undergraduate. And she really, really helped me build my voice. But I had no idea where I would go after that. I had no idea where I matched up, with other singers. I was, in the middle of beautiful rural Pennsylvania. The musicology
It's not Penn
faculty,
State. I'm forgetting the name of the town. It's
State
not
College.
State College. I was going to say College Point. Yes. State College, Pennsylvania, somewhere near Harrisburg, which is the capital. So
Mhm.
not Pittsburgh, not Philadelphia,
No,
in between, basically.
in
Yeah.
between. But a huge university, but being part of
Yeah.
a music school, you get, it's like the best of both worlds. There's a huge, a huge collegiate world out there, but also a really tight group of um, folks studying music. The musicology faculty tried to stage an intervention when I was leaving. They tried to convince me to go into musicology
Uh-huh.
because they thought that I could write well about music. And I said, well, thank you very much. I don't think I want to write a book. They're like, oh, it'll be great. It'll be great. But I wound up getting a great offer to New England Conservatory for music. And so I was really excited to keep moving on in performance. And
Hmm.
at NEC, I was really fortunate to be chosen before the school year began by John Moriarty. I was there for John Moriarty's last 2 years to be in the opera studio and got to spend 2 years really doing nothing but studying, staging, coaching opera all day long. It was an incredible opportunity. And after finishing that up, my first young artist hire was at Des Moines Metro Opera. Michael Eagle hired me to do their student run out shows and to cover Zerbinetta in their summer season, which was an
So
incredible.
for our listeners, Des Moines is the middle of the country. It's Iowa. Um, they have a famous, well-regarded company that performs a limited season. So it's not an opera company like Chicago or San Francisco or the Met
Mhm.
or Houston that performs for much of the year, but they do a
The festival
festival
season.
format, and it's probably late June, early July, that time frame there.
Hmm.
And Des Moines, Iowa is a lovely place. Um, it's very pleasant, very pastoral in its way. And some of the people there really love the arts. And I went to college in the neighboring state of Wisconsin, so got to go to Iowa. And
Hmm.
it's a very distinct state in America because you have people who politically are quite on the left, politically are quite on the right. You have all kinds of social issues that are played out in Iowa. We have presidential primaries and caucuses every
I
4 years.
I voted
And
in the Iowa caucuses when
and
I was.
Iowa was the first one in the country. And I don't know about you, but when I was a student, the standardized exams that we would take in high school were produced in Iowa because they were seen
Mm,
as the bellwether of the nation
interesting.
because there is so much diversity in Iowa. It's a very agricultural state, but because it's agricultural and they sell so much of their products abroad, they're conversant in language, in economics, in international trade, in tariffs, and all these things that are part of government and part of international trade that you would not necessarily expect to find in the middle of a country of a large agricultural country where basically they're harvesting pigs and soybeans and corn and wheat, some wheat and things like that. And yet Iowa punches well above its weight for a state of that size. It's a medium-sized state, but it's very international. And I'm not going to declare my own politics here, but it really runs the gamut from
It does.
quite left wing to quite right wing.
And I
And
got to see all of Iowa because I spent the first several months doing their educational tour. We did like 98
Hmm.
performances of Hansel and Gretel in schools. And we would drive around in this van and a truck, a little truck with our set. And there were a lot of towns where we went that the only place to eat was the gas station. Now, this was 20 years
Hmm.
ago. So, but it was for a city
Yeah.
girl on the tour, there were four women, and we had all grown up in a much more urban environment, and two men who were from the Midwest. And we
Hmm.
had all kinds of questions. Why are all these trees planted in a straight line? And they say, oh, girls, you don't know anything about the middle of the country. We learned about tornadoes. It was an incredible education, but it felt great to bring a beautiful opera. I mean, a beautiful Humperdinck music into all of these schools, and the kids just loved it.
You were saying that you sang Zerbinetta, which is Ariadne of Naxos by Richard Strauss.
Yeah.
Um, Great opera, an opera that I love more with each hearing and the more I study it, but probably a challenge in terms of following the story for people who are not quite into opera because long story short, is set in a palace of a man in Vienna. He's very wealthy, but he doesn't have much taste. And an opera singer, a diva, arrives and she wants to do her serious dramatic performance. But then a troupe of players, of Commedia dell'arte players, led by Zerbinetta, arrives and they just want to party. And she sings a very long, very hard aria called Großmächtige Prinzessin, which goes on and on and on and on about it's practically a parody of bel canto singing rather than it is bel canto singing. It's very hard, but it almost feels like a parody and is juxtaposed against the very serious diva who's there to
Hmm.
art. And there's a composer played by mezzo soprano who Musitas Heilige Kunst, I think is the aria. In other words, music, you holy art. And it's about how wonderful music is. And then we get to hear a lot of wonderful music, but it's dramatically a mess. And, I explained it pretty well just now, but I
You
left out
did.
many of the details. And that there's a sort of a master of the house who comes in and speaks it long in German. Maybe you did in English.
Hmm.
Um, it's a bit of a boutique item. This opera. It's a wonderful opera, but it's not something that is necessarily done every day. So we're going to get back to what you're talking about, but I want to ask you a question as general director of Austin Opera. How do you program when Austin, we're going to talk about, is a very diverse community,
It's a
even by
very,
Texas standards, which is a much more diverse state than people think. But
hmm
it's a very diverse community. Politically, it's the capital of the state of Texas. It's much bigger than people think it is. It's the fifth largest city. I think it's the 13th largest city in America. It is, it has a lot of high tech. It has a lot of country western. It has a lot of gardens and rivers, and people have all kinds of allergies there because of the
they do.
amount of plantation that was done. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a very complex place.
Yes.
So even when you have a population of 1 million, um, how do you program the operas that you program so that you're not just doing the basics, which are great, we love the basics,
Hmm.
but working in something like Ariana of Naxos, not that I'm saying you did that, but as an example. And then finally, how do you prepare the audience when you're doing something
Right.
like Ariana of Naxos?
It is not easy, Fred. It is not, and it's not easy anywhere. If we had the sort of kind of philanthropic infrastructure here to do 8 huge shows a season, we could cover our many constituencies. But it is quite challenging to cover those within the scope of a season of 2 to 3 large operas and maybe some smaller offerings. And I was, working in Philadelphia for 9 years before I came to Austin, which was a different market and a different with a different history in terms of the types of classical music programming that have been available there. So it's there has been something
Where
to
were
learn.
you working in Philadelphia and what company?
At Opera Philadelphia, I was
Okay.
there for 9 years. I was the managing director, was my final position there
Hmm.
before I went down to Austin to become general director. And Austin is it is a very diverse city. I would say, you certainly I have patrons that run, the broad range of the political spectrum, but it is a very pretty liberal, progressive place in terms of politics. There are funny dynamics. We are the state capital, but the state of Texas is not very fond of Austin. They are often politically at odds, which is an interesting environment. When we were navigating COVID, for example, and I talked to my colleagues in Houston or Dallas, there was a lot more concern there about, when it came to regulations and what we put in place, they were very concerned about how that might conflict with state law, whereas my colleagues in Austin really had no concerns because there was just an open kind of warfare of ideals between the city
Hmm.
and the state. So that is a
Yeah.
fascinating dynamic. And the state government here is only in session for a couple months every 2 years,
Yeah.
which is just finished in in
June.
June, and
Yeah.
so it is. It's a fascinating dynamic. Our population is largely Hispanic. It's going to be majority Hispanic probably within the next 10 to 15 years. We're about
When you say
40%
our, you mean Austin or the state of Texas?
Austin, Austin.
Okay.
And so we made a decision several years ago, because there are many directives and core purposes and things that an opera company can lean into, but you need to make some choices. And we're a $5 million opera company, which is certainly on the smaller side in this country. And so we really decided to lean into the Mexican American community, the Latin American community, and Spanish speaking repertoire. And that has and really engaged a much broader spectrum of our community and built the audience for everything we do, to lean much more Hispanic than the average opera audience, which
Hmm.
is terrific. And when we program specifically with that audience, we were the first opera company, I believe, to have a curator for Hispanic and Latinx repertoire. And so we've
Hmm.
been programming in that manner for some time. And we did a big concert on PBS that was filmed outdoors with 2,000 people in attendance. The enthusiasm is like nothing I've ever seen after a lifetime of, taking opera into maybe unlikely places or different communities. The the Mexican American community here in Austin and just Latin American music is so core to their culture and storytelling through music, that when we started programming a number of concerts at the Mexican consulate, for example, where we'd have some opera and then we have, familiar works from south of the border. I mean, it is the most enthusiastic, wild response I have ever seen. And we have hundreds of people show up every time we do one of these concerts. They sing along to a lot of the Spanish pieces and they love the arias. And it's also something I found that is very unique about the culture of Texas, or I'll say Austin. I don't know the whole state. I know Austin. That's where I live. But even if you have no actual, DNA that comes from Latin America, they're growing up in this city. It's so much a part of the culture of living here that when you have music like mariachi or ranchera, it speaks to everyone who feels any kind of roots to this town. And I never experienced that in Philadelphia, in the Northeast. There wasn't a cultural music that brought folks together despite what their actual cultural background was. And so
Well,
I
I'm
found
going to
that
interrupt a little
fascinating.
bit for a couple of reasons. Philadelphia is a city I know very well and love. I have family there. It has the Academy of Music, which goes back to 1857. It has the Philadelphia Orchestra, one of the world's greats.
Hmm.
What Philadelphia does not have is corporate presence. There are not a lot of corporations that have their homes in Philadelphia. There are a couple of big foundations, the
Yes.
Annenberg and the Pew, but there's not the potential for financially supporting these wonderful cultural institutions that are there. There's a fantastic art museum, several in Philadelphia. It's a culturally very rich city. It does have historically a large Italian American population,
Yeah.
and the Italian Americans would go to Italian operas done in Philadelphia, either by local companies or the Met that frequently came to Philadelphia on Tuesdays.
Yep.
Philadelphia has a stupendously talented and gifted and resourceful African American community
Hmm.
that punches way above its weight musically in terms of the great singers they produce, the musicians, and not just in the opera world, but in rock and popular music of all kinds. And so there's an amazing music culture there that I think because Philadelphia sits between New York, Washington, other large cities, that it sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. What Austin has, Texas is geographically a very large state, and there are important large cities, but they're not right next to each other, except for
Hmm.
Dallas and Fort Worth. And therefore, Houston can be a whole market. Dallas, Fort Worth can be a whole market. San
Yep.
Antonio could be a whole market. El Paso could be a whole market. And Austin could be a whole market. What Austin has, among many things, it has this great University of Texas.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things about the University of Texas that I greatly admire, it has, I believe, the largest archive in America of deposited writings and papers of great writers.
Yes.
That's a very important component of
Hmm.
the city that is not talked about enough. Um, it does have government, it has popular music, and increasingly in the past decade or so, it has become the destination for a lot of tech companies.
Hmm.
And again, politically, we could talk about the company's politics of being left, center, right. I'm not going there right now. But what I do find interesting is that cities with large tech populations don't necessarily have a natural migration to opera.
No.
And somehow the corporate donors that come from different backgrounds, the tech companies don't seem to have learned about being good citizens of the arts. And that's my broad statement. You could agree or disagree. But I look at San Francisco, and Seattle, which are cities with great cultural traditions, but they're not getting the support from tech. Boston, another city with great cultural traditions, not getting support from tech in terms of the arts. Um, Austin is younger that way as a tech capital, but right now ranks right up there with San Francisco and Seattle and Boston and New York in the middle of the country, more than Chicago and St. Louis and Atlanta. And therefore, you don't have to have the definitive answer on this, but I'm wondering, have you thought about how, in addition to the Latino community, which is very important as an audience, you said you're a $5 million company. There's a way to build that if people with lots of money, like tech billionaires, can help you build an endowment.
We have a pretty sizable endowment for an
Okay.
organization of our size. But here's the thing, Fred. So I have been in opera for I guess like 27 years. Um 20 no, yeah, 20 25. I'll say. 20 of them, my job has been to fund it. I
Mm-hmm.
started after I left being a singer. I have been in charge of finding the money to put it on. And the whole idea of corporate philanthropy has been a hoax for the entirety of my career. It's
Ah,
maybe 1, 2% of the philanthropy that goes into the mix. That was different 50, 60 years ago. And I'm not sure that it is as much indicative of the type of industry or just the newness of the industry. The only exception to the hoax that corporations give away money are those few companies that are still privately held. and run by a family, for example. So here in Austin and Texas, the biggest institutional funder is our grocery store, HEB. It's an
Mm.
amazing institution. I hadn't heard of it before moving to Texas, but when you move here, I mean, the first thing someone does is take you to HEB, the grocery store. But it is still a family-run institution run by incredible civic stewards. And so they put a ton of money into the community. But a publicly traded corporation, it is absolutely against what they're supposed to be doing in terms of earning money to give it away and invest it in the community.
I'm not.
Which
I'm
I know,
weeping through my laughter.
I know. Um, and it, and so I mean, our funding and the other tricky thing in Austin, at least in Philadelphia, as you said, there were like large institutions. There was legacy wealth. Someone had made a ton of money on oil or a railroad 200 years ago. Like think, what's the show on HBO right now? That's
Succession.
no, no, no. It all takes place in the Academy of Music. Like it's not. Um,
Oh, I know what you mean. The Gilded Age.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The Gilded Age, the third season's about to come out. Like those folks that like made their money and they put it into like the parks and they created these permanent institutions that have to give that money away every year to those causes. So we don't have any of that legacy wealth here in Austin. So engaging engaging the tech community, we've done a lot of things, but it's still really a game of engaging the individuals that have made their wealth in that way, who do have those values of civic stewardship. I mean, we did the revolution of Steve Jobs here, which
Hmm.
is, I love, we did a new production that Tomer Zwollen put together, and I love Mason Bates' music. And it was astonishing. It didn't draw anyone from the tech community. It didn't pull them in. We had an innovation council that was of different kind of tech entrepreneurs who helped us plan and think through innovation strategies. We did a big virtual reality experiment, and where it was kind of great to make those connections in terms of harnessing the company's uh, individual capacity for storytelling in different ways. It was hugely helpful as COVID hit. We were one of the first companies to get a weekly broadcast up and running because I had a bunch of guys that were guys who I could call and say, I need a video camera and I need you to teach me how to do this by next week.
Yeah.
Um, but we have put um, big efforts into a lot of areas, and where the huge return that comes back to us in terms of audience participation, in terms of new philanthropy, it's all been with the Latinx community. It's not that we aren't putting it out there in terms of tech, but it just doesn't the effort that's put out and return. If San Francisco hasn't cracked that code on their
Yeah.
$100 million budget, I'll keep trying, but I don't know if I'm going to crack it either, Fred. It's
Well,
tough.
so because we have an international audience and because we live in very political times, I want to both explain to the international audience who may not know American politics and mores, but also not take a political position because I don't want to. I have my beliefs, of course, but that's not why we're here today because opera appeals to everyone and it can and should.
Does.
Yeah. But I'm 69. I've never quite said that, but I'm 69. I was born in 1956, and I
Amazing.
began working in opera when I was 16 at the Lyric Opera Chicago. And I was trained in that environment of both corporate and public support in a city that loves music and
Yeah.
loves being better than New York, frankly. Enrique Mazzola was my guest last week, and we spoke about Chicago and its rivalry with New York. And in later years, Dallas and Atlanta, but especially Dallas, had a rivalry with New York. LA and Los Angeles did in a certain way. But
Interesting.
I don't care about these rivalries, but I do believe that every state in our country, we just discussed Iowa, has very distinct character and personality.
Mhm.
And I have never been to Houston, believe it or not. I wish I could go. but I have been in a lot of Texas. But as my Texan friends say, friends don't let friends go to Houston. But I don't buy that. Houston has a wonderful cultural life and
Yeah.
great museums, and I've known many wonderful people from Houston, and their young artist programs terrific, and so no
Hmm.
complaints about Houston for me. But I've never been there. But the rest of the state I have visited a fair amount. I like it. It's very diverse. Um, but one thing that has struck me about Texas is ingrained in the culture and tradition, left, right, or center, is a regard for the arts that one would not necessarily
Right.
expect based on cowboy movies and so on, but it's very deeply anchored and cuts across the spectrum. So when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, we had several Texans um, who would come to New York and fund all kinds of things here at the Met. And, they would get their names not plastered on the buildings, but acknowledged. For example, Sybil Harrington, most famously, who was from an oil family, as in petroleum, petrol, um, but also the Bass family, and there were others. And the Bass family were at Fort Worth, and they helped build beautiful Bass Hall, which is a stupendous theater in Fort Worth. Fort
Hmm.
Worth has the Kimball Art Museum, all kinds of great stuff going on all over Texas. Um, but when I worked at the Met, I often had to interact with Sybil Harrington, who was, I'm trying to use my Texas accent, a widow, and she loved opera, and she liked the attention from singers, from Domingo and Franco Zeffirelli and others. But that's not why she gave the money. She
Hmm.
gave the money because she genuinely believed in supporting the art form, and at that time in the 80s, saw the reach that she could achieve being greater in New York with Zeffirelli productions of Turandot and Tosca and others. And she was a lovely lady and would come by and say hello to me in my office. And I once said to her, how have you been able to do this? And she said in her accent, it's all thanks to Earl. And I said, I'm glad. And then a couple of other times I said to her, so how's Earl? She said, what do you mean? I said, how's Earl who's helping you do this? She said, darling, it's not Earl, it's oil. Gasoline. Every
Yeah.
time you buy a gallon, I help pay for the opera. But she understood,
Yeah.
that she was given this gift of this great resource of money, but it could be used for good things, and not just in New York City, but
Hmm.
everywhere. The Bass family and other very wealthy families of Texas. Van Cliburn, the wonderful musician,
Right.
had a lot of money. He created the Van Cliburn competition. All of these Texans who do it in a slightly ostentatious but very charming way, um, that they like showing that this is how we support Texas. What I can also say is that of all the cities I know in America, and I know many, the best used bookshops are in Dallas. And the
Mm.
reason for that is that many families 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago would acquire a library of all the masterpieces. And if they had an interest, say, in Richard Wagner, they'd
Oh,
buy books
cool.
on Wagner. So many of my books I bought in Dallas through my visits through the years in Dallas, because I would go to shops and suddenly you have books on Donizetti. Sure, here's all your books on Donizetti.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so my rather good library is not completely built in Dallas, but largely in terms of used books. I remember one time I was in Dallas and the shop had a lot of Wagner books. So I bought older Wagner books. And so Texas has all that. And I just imagine it's such a large, diverse state, it's a little harder to tap into than, say, Iowa, where all the people who love opera might congregate in Des Moines, or the Writers'
Right.
Workshop at the University of Iowa for writing. And Patchett, a lot of great writers, Tennessee Williams, I think, studied in Iowa for writing.
Hmm.
And so I know it's your challenge, but I also feel that the potential in Austin and in Texas, but in your case, Austin, is huge. And just harder to, maybe it's how you cultivate the emotional attachment. And maybe it's because these tech companies of which we spoke were not native to Texas.
Hmm.
And that maybe finding people who are Texans who have this cultural impulse, which I find very sincere in Texas. It's not about writing a big check to say I've given $1 million to whatever company, but there is a genuine sense of supporting the arts that I don't find in every state in the United States, but I do find it in Texas.
I agree, but you were also correct earlier when you talked about how large Texas is and how spread out our markets are. So the experience of going to the opera in Houston and Dallas and Austin is profoundly different. It's a profoundly different group and vibe of individuals who are making that happen, and it's wonderful in each place. You know, in Austin, all of our philanthropy, what's really remarkable is that, of our money that comes into the company, 96% of it is individual philanthropy or individuals buying tickets. And all of that money is earned. Like they earned it last year at their medical practice, or they earned it when they sold their tech company, several years before that. And so, coming from a city where there was much more legacy philanthropy or inherited wealth and a value of supporting the community that comes with that, it's also remarkable to be in a place where these are individuals who earn their money and then right away are putting it, investing it right back where they live. It's quite inspiring. And I
Mhm.
agree that the potential is huge, or I wouldn't have been here for 9 years and I wouldn't be planning
Right.
to stay here another nine. It is a city that's rapidly growing, and it is growing in wealth and resources. And it's not the type of resources that have historically supported opera, but I'd rather find a way to work that in along with building new audiences. And when I talk about also, when we're talking about engaging the Hispanic community, there are plenty of billionaires in that community, Fred.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, and so there are lots of resources. It's really been about, and not just at the opera, but all of the cultural organizations here really coming together in a way to just set new bars for the type of civic stewardship that this wonderful, beautiful city deserves. Like that's the job.
Um, I'm going to take us to a place in terms of subject matter that is, I think, very interesting. It was how I was trained in terms of opera economics. That when you are a city in the middle of North America,
Hmm.
um, therefore significantly distant from the coast, from the north, let's say Minnesota, just to pick a northern place, or Boston, or Philadelphia, or any places, a lot of times companies of medium size, but even the large companies, co-produce their productions. And since we're talking about Latin America, I know pretty well. Um, what's interesting in Santiago, Chile, and Buenos Aires, Argentina, is that in Santiago, they're better at building the scenery, and in Buenos Aires, they're better at making the costumes.
Oh,
And
cool.
often they co-produce productions that are seen in one and or the other, but then the productions are rented. And
Yeah.
because both Buenos Aires on the Atlantic and Santiago is near the Pacific, um, they can ship these productions to Japan or Spain or North America. And because they can be built at a certain cost, and
Hmm.
Austin's right in the middle, so it'd be a little harder to access the productions than would say San Diego or Savannah, Savannah, Georgia. But the idea of co-producing, even on the landmass, that you and another company in Canada, in Mexico, can produce a production that helps defray the costs and also may engage a singer or more singers who be willing to
Exactly.
perform both in the originating city and then the reproduction city. I'm going to say let's pick cities: Winnipeg, Canada, Monterrey, Mexico, and Austin, Texas.
Hmm.
So that these can appear in three places. And your Mexican billionaire funder or your Canadian opera
Yeah.
lover who happens to be supporting a young singer, or Leah Crocetto, who's a big favorite of mine, a wonderful soprano who I've known since she was an opera baby, and now is based, I believe, in Austin. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
she's ours.
So
Yeah.
Leah is a wonderful soprano who, I'm just going to say this out there, she has more colors in her voice than most
Yes.
singers do. And what's
Yes.
remarkable is how she can tap into and deploy those colors in all kinds of characterizations that she does. So therefore, is a
And
very hireable singer.
across genres too.
Yeah.
'Cause I got to know her well when I was in Philadelphia. She did Don Carlo there and did some other kind of salon recitals for us. And she
I
sung
saw
a
it.
couple
Yeah.
things for us here. And she is just such a gorgeous, diverse, beautiful artist. One of my favorite. My jaw fell on the floor when I heard that she was taking a permanent post at UT Austin. I thought, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
So therefore, I don't need to recommend to you, but I'm saying this for our listeners, that
Hmm.
there are ways that opera companies, especially ones that have small to medium budgets, but have large audiences, have audiences with distinct characteristics, are able to make a go of things. It's not like, say, the Met that does its own La Boheme and will
Right.
keep playing its La Boheme. Other companies may not do La Boheme every year, and so therefore they can build a production to share. Have you explored that? We're already done it with Austin.
We have, in a number of ways, the traditional co-production format where you buy in to share the cost of building a production. But we just, the last show we did here in Austin was Madame Butterfly, and we took it to another level, partnering with Opera San Antonio, which
Mm-hmm.
is 90 minutes away. Their general director is Lauren Meeker, who's a wonderful, trusted general director and stage director and friend.
Yep.
And so we work together to align our dates to cast the production. We cast a chorus from both of our choruses, so
Mm-hmm.
from both cities. And so the show rehearsed in San Antonio, where local housing, they have a better local housing deal.
Mm-hmm.
Opened in San Antonio, ran for 2 nights, and then Easter Sunday, the set got loaded on a truck, and on Monday, we drove up the highway to Austin, went into tech rehearsals, and we opened by Friday in Austin, where we did 3 more performances. So that was a wild and crazy ride, but it meant we spent 5 days less in the theater paying for tech time because we were able to bring many members of the design team from San Antonio straight to Austin. It meant we could get great artists because instead of 2 performances or 3 performances, it was 5 performances
Yep.
in the same lick of time. Um, we rented a set from Utah, which we know and love. Lauren directed it, did a beautiful job, had cultural consultants who came in, were with her every step of the way. And so we did that. We did Madame Butterfly for about 30% less than if we had done it on our own. And that
Mm.
is huge, that is
Yeah.
that is huge for two companies of our size.
Um, it's interesting you mentioned Utah, Salt Lake City, because it's a company I visited only once, quite a while ago, but very impressive because, again, for people who don't know, Utah is the most Mormon state in the country, and I'm not going to characterize the Mormons in one way or another, except they'll drink coffee. But the thing about the Mormons is that they have their very strong religious beliefs, but I also find them very open to other ideas.
Yes.
And more than certain other religions, if I can categorize, and
Hmm.
that they're willing to listen and learn, even if it's not their cup of coffee or tea. But so I found that in Utah, my one visit plus keeping my finger on the pulse, that they're very open actually to operas that may challenge the prevailing cultural or social or religious standard. And that's to their credit because Madame Butterfly is about an American who impregnates a Japanese girl of 15, and she has a child. and it's a mixed race child, and she converts from the Japanese religion to Christianity, and
Hmm.
is abandoned by her Japanese side, and is ultimately spurned by the American side, has to give up her child, her son, who is taken to America, where supposedly it will be better for him to grow up as an American boy, even mixed race. And it's incredibly tragic opera because no one comes out the better for it.
No.
And they're adhering to the conventions of their religions, their times, and their cultures. And that's part of what opera does so magically well, especially with great music, that it can address
Hmm.
issues without dictating issues. And so Madame Butterfly can play in Utah and speak to those people there. Uh, my first time that I saw it, I didn't quite get it. I was too young. But then I saw it in a later performance in Italy where the audience was in tears halfway through,
Hmm.
anticipating what was going to come. And I asked people at the intermission, because they did it with two intermissions, why were you crying? And they explained, because this is what's going to happen. It's so inevitable. And it could have been better, but it was not better because of her society, of his society,
No.
of the mixed race issues. And I'm talking 1975. I'm not talking 50 years ago. I'm not talking about right now. And,
Yeah.
but, so therefore, I think it's wonderful that the production came from Utah and was seen in two Texas cities.
Thank you. If I can share a similar experience that I had, we talked about how politically diverse Texas and Austin is. Like we run the full gamut. Um, and we did a new production of Cruzar. So Cruzar is a mariachi opera that premiered in Houston 10 or 15 years ago. And so we created a new version with Minnesota that has a full orchestration. But the story is really a multi-generational story about Mexican Americans in America. And you find out as a man is nearing his death that he had an entirely other family in Mexico who he was separated from when he came to America to work. And there's a really touching scene where his pregnant wife tries to board across just to be with him, to be reunited with her husband, and she dies. Um, and in this, when it was originally done, there wasn't a lot of scenery or staging. And in this new version that we did, I mean, there was a modern representation of a border wall on a stage. It was artful, but it was
Mhm.
clear to my audience what it was representing. And I really wondered how that would go. And I watched night after night after night because I know politically where many of my patrons are. And I
Yeah.
watched folks on opposite sides next to each other just weeping for this woman, this pregnant woman who's just trying to get to her husband because the underlying timelessness of the humanity and also of a dying father who's in and out of dementia and the different generations trying to reconcile their current reality of being an American, but their roots in another place. It was so the humanity underneath it and the universality of the story. People just my audience, the entire audience, and I was watching specific people who I thought, oh, they're gonna maybe think we're trying to say something outside of the humanity of the story, and they would grab me afterwards with the tears coming down their face, and I was like, God, who would have thought in this day and age, it really is in the opera house that we are bringing together people of all kinds of differently held beliefs on an issue that's historic, but also happening right now. And we can have our hearts and minds moved together. Like, thank goodness. And I feel very passionate and serious about that. I certainly have my own political beliefs. And we are as a company so committed to inclusion, but we we are never, we can't move folks' hearts and minds if we can't get them into the house. We've got to get people in the house, and we have to offer an experience that can reach into folks with the amazing qualities of opera that can actually do this. So we can have a shot, to maybe find some common ground because there's so much more common ground there than we are experiencing in the
Yeah.
world right now.
To which I would add, as a general advice, not to CEOs like yourself, but to opera directors, that let the material, both music and
Yeah.
words, speak for themselves and don't dictate, because that kind of thing becomes old and tired and narrow very quickly. Um, Although you can certainly allude to things, I'll give you an example that I lived myself. When I was 23, I was living in Europe and working at La Scala and had the chance to go to Berlin and work in Berlin for a while as a 23-year-old, and went to opera productions in West Berlin when there was still the Berlin Wall up. And I went to opera productions in East Berlin, both of great quality, but very different, um, because West Berlin was actually surrounded by East Germany and was
Hmm.
like the Austin surrounded by other things, so to speak. Whereas East Berlin was part of the majority, but they could not speak freely.
Right.
And the production I went to in East Berlin was Tosca. And they played it completely traditionally Tosca with, Mario and all the things that we know from Puccini's Tosca, except that when at the end Mario is put to death at the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome, it was not the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome, it was just a wall. And when Tosca at the very end,
Wow.
Mario's being killed, says, "O scarpi avanti a Dio," and she jumps off the parapet of the Castel Sant'Angelo. No, she jumped off a wall.
Yeah.
Now, no one had to announce to the audience that was the Berlin Wall, and that she was doing whatever she could, even if it meant dying, to get out.
Hmm.
When, in other words, to get to West Berlin with all of its complications, and the fact that no one said that's the Berlin Wall, they didn't have to.
No.
And it was just the genius of the person who either designed it or had the concept of doing that, that was so eloquent to the entire audience, who then they could walk out and they probably wouldn't talk about it, but they knew what they were seeing.
Right.
And that's what excellent opera stagecraft can do, I think, better than a lot of other art forms, because opera accommodates expression if you know what you're doing
Right.
and you're not dictating. That's the key thing.
I agree 100%, Fred. And that is something that I have definitely come to learn over time in this role and sitting in the audience for every performance we do. That you don't have to be heavy-handed. That often it completely backfires, or you just miss the opportunity to really move folks along at that deep level that opera is kind of uniquely positioned to reach. I agree.
Um, my one visit to Austin that was opera related, I think, was before you were there. If I'm correct, it was 2010. It was the year that the company did Poulenc's Dialogues of the Carmelites.
Oh, did they? That's awesome. I didn't know that. Oh, that's
Oh, and they
cool.
brought in Virginia Zayani, who was in the original cast, and they brought in me, and basically we were there to educate the audience and the artists. And one of the things that I loved doing that was that someone, whoever had this idea, said, "You're not just there, Fred, to educate the audience. You're there to be a sounding board for the artist to talk about it." And Virginia Zayani, who was a wonderful teacher and had experience playing in the opera, could tell her history with the opera, but also her opinions about different roles. And Dialogues of the Carmelites, for people who don't know, was written in 1957 or premiered um, at La Scala.
Mm.
And Poulenc believed at the time, he died in 1963, that the opera should be done in the language of the audience. And not all operas are that. So that when it premiered in San Francisco, which I believe was the second production, and Leontine Price was in it, they did it in English. When they did it in Milan, they did it in Italian. When they did it in Paris, they did it in French. When it came to the Met in its wonderful production, it was
Mhm.
originally done in English. But then at a certain point, the Met decided to do it in French. because it's an opera set in France, and that was the change. And so now they don't always follow Poulenc's dictates, but when you're doing an opera in a foreign language, especially one set in France, where the characters speak mostly a sort of colloquial French, a couple
Hmm.
of the more educated French. Um, you as an artist can know all this, but then you have to put on the stage what's on the stage. By the way, Leah Crocetta would be great in that opera. I'm just putting
Oh,
that out
yes.
there. She'd be
Yes.
terrific. Now that she'd be just terrific. And if it was done in 2010, you can plan it again in a new
Yes, it's been
production,
long
fair
enough.
production. Oh, good. Um, and because again, it's a story of Carmelite nuns in France who did not side with the royalty, with the monarchy. They did not side with the revolutionaries who overthrew the monarchy. They sided with him,
God.
her, them upstairs, and with their religious beliefs. But within the context of that, each woman had her own approach to her belief system. And what is so beautifully done in this opera, without exaggeration, is we come to understand that they're not monolithic in their beliefs, although they all are Carmelite nuns who believe in Christ and their particular denomination of Catholicism. And but you don't have to be a Catholic, you don't have to be religious to really get into this opera because
Hmm.
it's
It's
about
one of the
belief.
best.
And belief is something that we can, when I teach the opera Lohengrin, an opera I love to teach, I teach it as being about belief.
Hmm.
And so therefore, whatever the politics or the complications are, if you can really fasten on to the fact that if you have a deeply held belief, does it mean that everyone else's beliefs that are not the same are not valid? Or if you believe in the religion you believe in, do you discard the monarchy and discard the revolutionaries? And are they both bad? Are they? There are all kinds of questions that could be asked, and the opera does it so beautifully. To many people, and perhaps myself included, it's the greatest opera of the second half of the 20th century.
I agree.
Um, I certainly rank it up there. And so, therefore, I think I'm remembering now how open the audience was. And I think 2010
Yeah.
was a very different time for Austin than now.
Hmm.
I remember it was springtime because um, people know their Texas history. Lady Bird Johnson, the first lady, wife of Lyndon Baines Johnson, loved conservation and
Hmm.
preservation and gardening and so on. And she planted all kinds of flowers that
Yeah.
everybody in Austin was allergic to, but not me because I'm not from Austin. So often I was called upon to be the only person who could speak without coughing and sneezing and scratching because I was not allergic to the local plant life. I'm allergic to what we have in New York. And it was a very wonderful time. And people were so welcoming. And it happened to be that the legislature was in session and Rick Perry was governor. And I wanted to go watch the Texas legislature. And he was coming around shaking hands and asking that we vote for him. And I said, I'm from New York. And he took his hand away. He said, well, why am I asking you to vote? I'm here as your guest. I'm working at the opera.
That's amazing.
But it was so interesting because I'd never encountered a state before in which the legislature has a limited session every two
Right.
years.
That's
And
wild.
yeah, and you were just saying it ended in June. I was there in springtime of, I think,
Hmm.
2010. So I'm mentioning this because opera is always challenged. It's been challenged since it was born, but presents so many opportunities for ideas and interchange and shared experience, even if we don't
Yes.
always agree. More than cinema, more than books. And we can talk about books but there's something about the visceral experience of what music,
Hmm.
which is not tangible in literal ways. It can be an abstraction, but somehow the music is what triggers the response to the ideas, in my view.
I agree. And as you're speaking so wisely, Fred, it it makes sense to me that we are drawing large crowds for opera these days, especially if it's a title that's known, an experience that people think this will be worth my money. I'm going to go have it. And we did just comparing how things land differently today than they did before. I think people are. It would be understandable if folks are tired of being told what to do or think, because we're just assaulted with that, and we don't trust much of what we're being told and
Mm.
what the veracity and the truth of it is anyway. But in an opera experience, especially if you don't have, a heavy-handed, directed concept, but one that really leaves it for the audience to to process it deeply and process it with others in person. There is something about that experience that in some ways feels more extraordinary now than it
Mm.
did 10 years ago. This company did The Manchurian Candidate right when I was
Mm.
interviewing, and we did it again 3 days.
Talk about who wrote it and then the story, because not everyone knows the story.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
so The Manchurian Candidate, there is based on a Richard Condon political thriller, and then there was two famous U.S. films about it, and it's
One of them
about
good.
one of them. Everybody says that. About a U.S. war hero who is basically brainwashed during his time in Korea, I believe.
Yeah.
And then when he comes back to the country, he's, manipulated by the Koreans to be a sleeper assassin that's infiltrating political office. And we did it again this year. So both were during, US elections, but this year it just hit differently with folks, no matter where you fell on the spectrum. But the idea of you can't believe what you see and the idea of manipulation as being a political tactic. But again, it's the same story, but so much of it is communicated through music, and there's these beautiful human relationships running underneath it all. It's quite extraordinary. And it's also interesting to hear you say, how welcoming the audience was in 2010. And I believe it. I also
Oh, yeah.
noticed that when I came here for the first time to see a show, and I was interviewing and they were doing The Manchurian Candidate. It felt, having produced many operas in the Northeast, I often got the feeling that people would arrive at the theater and say, well, this will probably be a disappointment. Prove me wrong. And and in Austin, people arrive, they're like, this is gonna be great. Let's go, And there is the way that you enter a cultural experience, the more of your day that you can drop and the more open and optimistic you enter that experience, the more likely you are that it's going to be enjoyable, that you'll learn something or think of something in a new way. And I do think here in Austin, that is more of the general approach to a cultural experience, which is nice. It's nice.
I'm just realizing that Austin, Greater Austin, has a lot of musical and film celebrities.
It does.
Really, a lot of them live there or nearby because it's a good place to live. And have any of them reached out or expressed an interest in opera as an art form, as a way to engage them?
It's I can't wait till my husband watches this because
Okay.
I married a civilian, which is the first non-musician, non-artist I ever dated. And 20 years later, we're doing great. But he all the time is like, you need to, tweet to James Vanderbeek or something and get them to the opera. Matthew McConaughey is a kind of a great
Yes.
cultural supporter here in Austin. Hasn't made it to the opera yet, but has been to the ballet and to lots of other things. I will say, I got a call on my cell phone several weeks ago, and I usually never answer if I don't know who it is. But something in me said, you need to answer this call. And I said, hi, this is Annie. And he said, hello, this is Robert Rodriguez, really famous film director who lives here in
Yeah.
Austin.
Yeah.
And I then had to, we had an amazing conversation. He has a very, very talented daughter, and he wanted to talk about really taking her vocal training to the next level.
Hmm.
And she's now working with our team over at the opera. And we had, incredible conversation. I have a talented daughter here as well. And but to pretend like I was a normal person for 20 minutes, it took me hours to recover after that call because it was my husband said, I think that's the like actually only legitimate famous person you've ever talked to. And I wasn't prepared for it. So yeah, we have definitely had interest from the film community that continues to grow here. And especially with this opening of our new venue, which will have a 180 seat black box theater. We've
which I
been able
want
to
to get to, but let's stick to quote celebrities because
celebrities.
one person that I have in mind, I think he's still composing, um, is Willie Nelson,
Oh
who has such a lyric gift.
yeah, he does.
His melodies, I mean, there are many popular musicians as opposed to opera musicians who have a remarkable melodic gift, and he's one of them. And I suppose he's 90 at least, that I would love to hear a song cycle or a series of songs that I'm not going to call them operatic or leader or anything like that, but the Austin cycle, something in which Willie Nelson will be inspired by a voice, by a person, by a couple, perhaps, by perhaps one singer singing and the other person narrating, um, perhaps based on local citizens who are famous in Austin but not the world beyond, as a means of premiering a Willie Nelson song cycle, which can be 5 songs. It doesn't have to be 8 or 20. Um, I just I think that would be very interesting and would open the door to all kinds of funders and people who would not put their foot inside an opera house. I have another idea I'm going to tell you away from, from this conversation.
But I can have
But
that one for free.
oh yeah, you can have the
Okay,
other one
thanks.
for free too. But I don't want to because the person I have in mind is really very talented, but I'm not sure she's interested in this.
Okay.
But Willie Nelson, I think would be an interesting figure, and his melodic gift is so great
Hmm.
that I get one of your funders to commission. Not that Willie Nelson needs the money, but maybe donate to a charity that Willie Nelson believes in, whatever you want. Um, and it doesn't have to be Willie Nelson. I just think it's a good idea because of his melodic gift and because he is a presence and because that song cycle, which was born in Austin, could be played at Carnegie Hall in San Francisco and Wigmore Hall in London and wherever you go, wherever a singer would take it
I
or
love it.
singer and speaker.
Hmm.
So I do want to talk to you about your new theater. Where did you perform and will you still perform there? And what's the new building? Talk about all that.
Oh, sure. So we, for the past 15 years, have performed at the Long Center for the Performing Arts, and that was built 15 years ago for the ballet and the symphony and the opera, and we're the founding resident companies. And it is a great venue to produce opera in, especially coming from Philadelphia, where we had the gorgeous Academy of Music, which has a lot on aesthetic appeal, but it is tough when you've got hundreds of seats behind structural columns. There's no wing
Yeah.
space. So to be in a more modern theater where we do have wing space and a loading dock, it's a great theater, 2,400 seat theater. And
Mhm.
then we had rented kind of rehearsal, and there's no rehearsal space at the Long Center. So we had rented rehearsal and administrative space for several years. Um, but we were able this past summer to purchase a gorgeous 16,000 square foot building. There was a real surplus of office inventory on the market here.
Mhm.
And so we were able to get a wonderful deal on a building. We moved in September, and then we moved back out this summer to retrofit about 60% of it to add a black box theater, about 180 seats, but also it'll serve as a beautiful recital hall, rehearsal hall. We'll have 4 additional rehearsal studios, outdoor event space. We'll finally have our costume shop in-house.
Mhm.
And so we're just excited to be able to not only, have our own space to rehearse and perform and augment what we do at the Long Center with all kinds of performances in the smaller hall, but also to make that space available to all our peers. There is a desperate need for performance and rehearsal space in Austin. I mean, you wouldn't believe the
For rental, yes.
for rental. Yep. Yes, yes. It's an additional revenue source. Hey, if someone wants to endow it, I'll make it free. Anyway, the
I
money
can give you
comes
my
in.
Willie Nelson idea for free, but you got to rent your hall, your spaces.
Yes, it will be rental. And for events as well, in all kinds of genres. It'll be perfectly built for classical music, but will also work for theater, for mariachi, also for family programming. There's so many great works for kids, and especially Spanish language works for kids. So we're excited to expand all of our programming with our own space there too.
Now, serious question, though it may sound flippant, it's a very serious question. Will that place have a good kitchen?
Yes.
Okay, because I once was a consultant on a project like this, and I write cookbooks in addition to working in opera.
I know.
And I said, I think you need a kitchen. They thought I was joking. And I said, no, if you do a rental space and you have catering, or if you rent it out for weddings or things like that, you need a proper kitchen for the food to be served. And initially it was an investment with refrigerators and ovens and all that, but it has so completely paid off
Yes.
as an investment, because a lot of times people looking for spaces for a corporate reception for one of your local tech companies, for a
Yep.
wedding, for a political gathering, for you name it, and they want to serve food,
Yes. We have a
and they
wonderful,
can't always go to a barbecue restaurant, even in
I know.
Austin.
We've got a great restaurateur caterer in town, Cameron Lockley, who donates a lot to the opera and does so many of our functions. And I brought him in before we began construction. I said, "What do you need?" Because for something that's not performance based, I want them to go straight to him to book the space and to plan it out. Yeah, and also great thing about Texas, very easy to get a liquor license. It's not like the Northeast where you have to, kill someone to take over their license and give them out here.
And since you bring it up, because I had not thought to bring that up, but Pennsylvania is one of the hardest states in the country to get that kind of licensing. In
Oh,
Pennsylvania, there's a state board, as well as New Hampshire, that there's a person responsible for selecting which wines and liqueurs, and the whole process. I know many Philadelphians who drive to New Jersey to
yes,
purchase their alcoholic beverages and drive back to Pennsylvania.
I did
Um,
that.
yeah, so I'm glad you can get a liquor license. That doesn't surprise me
Right.
in Texas. But, and by the way, another thing about, if I know my Texas geography pretty well, there are German and Czech communities not all that far from you.
Yes.
Because I think of this because of the brewing tradition, that a lot of famous Texas beers were born of German and Czech immigrants. And obviously the Germans, but also the Czechs, have a very strong musical
Hmm.
heritage and attachment. And I'd be interested how one day you might work them in as well, now that you have a kitchen and a liquor license. In terms of things like an opera program by a singer who might be in the line of Edita Gruberova.
My favorite. My favorite of all time.
I know she's your favorite. That's why I bring her up. Edita Gruberova, which Adagio listeners can find abundantly on adagio.com, was a fantastic coloratura soprano. You describe Edita Gruberova, which I will just add one thing, was known in Germany as Die Gruberova. In other words, the
Doug
Gruberova,
Barbarova.
like the boss, Bruce Springsteen, the Gruberova. She was at that level in terms of her fame and being loved.
So when I was a young coloratura, studying CDs in the listening library, that's how we did it back in my day. And I loved everyone, Natalie Dessay, and I loved June Anderson, and of course, Joan Sutherland was otherworldly. But I loved Adita Gruberova's, first of all, just her sheer voice, that little bit of steel in it. I had a little bit of metal in my voice as well. But yet so round, so beautiful, so effortless, so flawless. I mean, it would just cut through with the most Syrian beauty. And I got to hear her in person. When I was a student, I spent a summer doing a summer program in Salzburg, and she was performing in Munich toward the end of her career. And I
Hmm.
took a train there to a sold out show and made a little sign, Ich brauche eine Karte bitte. And someone, sold me their ticket for face value. And I was in the first row of the balcony. And she came onto stage, and I just burst into tears. I couldn't believe.
Remember what opera it was?
Hmm?
You
I
remember what opera
Puritani.
was?
Puritani.
I
I
Puritani.
Puritani.
I asked because I've been fortunate to work a lot in Salzburg and spend a fair amount of time in Munich and northern Italy. And she basically was based in Munich
Hmm.
and or nearby, and would retire Lucia, retire Norma, retire Puritani, retire Lucrezia Borgia in Munich. And
Hmm.
people would descend from all over Central Europe to attend these farewells to different roles. So I went to many of them. Um, I think my favorite, it was not a great production, but it didn't matter, was Lucrezia Borgia, which just gave her the opportunity to go nuts in a great mad
Yes.
scene. But with all the notes intact,
Yeah.
everything, well into her 60s, everything
Yes.
functioning miraculously well, the technique solid. And because
Remarkable.
she had such a devoted audience everywhere, but especially Munich, um, the level of fan worship was what we don't necessarily see all that often in opera anymore. And
No.
I'm not talking about ancient history, I'm talking about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, that they knew what they were hearing.
Yeah.
When you have a Jonas Kaufman who's from there too, he's handsome, he's talented, he's artistic, and they love being in the presence of Jonas Kaufman. I do too. But it's not that kind of hysteria that would
Hmm.
happen when you had a Gruberova, which was really something. Gruberova, as they pronounced it. But anyway, I mentioned this because there are singers of Czech heritage, there are singers of Slovak heritage, obviously singers of German heritage, who either are based in North America, can come to North America, and it
Hmm.
might be interesting to
Yeah.
tease out that vein as well.
And I love that repertoire. I would love to do a
Yeah.
cunning little vixen. I would,
Yeah.
yeah, love. We've got Rosalka definitely on the short list. And
Hmm.
so,
Um, Latanya Moore, the Philadelphian, I believe. No, she's a Texan.
yeah.
I'm sorry. She's a Texan,
Yes.
but she studied in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Just had a huge success as Jennifer in Cleveland.
I
Huge
saw
with the Cleveland
that.
Orchestra. And given that she's a Texan, given that she's always cast as Aida in certain roles that we think
Mhm.
of her for, but can do a lot more. I think the New York Times Review described her as sumptuous in her singing of Yennefer.
I
And
agree.
it's the kind of opera that you can do in concert, frankly.
Right. Um,
And
Latonya had a very special Austin Opera debut during in 2021. We produced Tosca at the Circuit of the Americas, which is the only
mhm,
Formula One racetrack in the United States with big outdoor arena. And she sang Tosca in the pouring rain for opening night for us,
wow.
and was just not only remarkable artist, but remarkable to sing under those circumstances. Although
Yeah,
everybody was happy to sing at that point under any
yeah.
circumstances. So it would be great to have her back in something indoors, dry, and different. Yeah.
Hmm. And I don't dictate to you, but if I were doing the planning, given that she is a Texan,
Hmm.
given that she has long Philadelphia roots, um, and she's singing sumptuously the role of Yennefer, which is something that I think now she can add to her repertoire elsewhere, having sung it with the Cleveland Orchestra. That, as they say in Texas, y'all should be the first, and then she'll come to New York and elsewhere. So, Annie Burridge, did I leave anything out that we wanted to talk about?
No, I think Fred, you just touched on, the very last thing that we are proud of here in Austin is we are a great house for singers like LaTanya Moore to sing something for the first time. We have a great hall with great acoustics and such a loving audience that we've kind of built a practice of, giving great singers who are right on their way up or already there the chance to sing something in such a supportive environment. And we love that we're able to do that here in Austin and offer great tacos and barbecue during their stay.
True. Yeah, I wish you had a little more fish, but
Ish.
I like
No.
seafood. I mean, the meat was great. The brisket was fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But it's like when I worked at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, it was like steak again?
Yeah.
You were on the Atlantic Ocean and every day it's steak. The brisket is wonderful in Austin and Texas in general, but I wouldn't mind a little more fish.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Anyway, Annie Burridge, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fred. It was a lot of fun.